Okay, everyone, it's 9 a.m. I'll call the meeting to order of the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District. Welcome to all of our guests. Cassie, would you like to go through the virtual meeting guidance, please?
Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public, and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few decorum rules for all. While the Commission and staff are in person, we are still offering a Zoom option so members of the public can attend. If you are attending virtually and would like to speak, you can do so during appearances by the public. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube, and the public chat has been disabled, but you can still message the host if needed. Finally, Commissioners, please use your microphones while speaking and ensure your mic is off if you are not speaking so others can utilize the mics. As a reminder, only 3 of the table mics can be live at a time, and please also bring the mic close to you while speaking. Also ensure that you state your name before speaking for those who may be joining us via Zoom. Those are the decorum rules of the District Commission. Thank you for following them, and let's have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you, Cassie.
President Hubble, Commissioner Rummel has joined us.
Okay, thank you. And that leads us to announcements. Bill?
None.
No announcements, okay. And we have appearances by the public. Is there any member in the room or online that wishes to appear? Any member of the public in the room or online? I don't see any hands raised online or in the room, so we'll move on to the consent calendar, where we have approval of the minutes of 8/22, approval of cash statement, capital fund. Then we have a sewer extension for replacement sanitary in Madison, Patterson Street. Reviewing proposals and award a contract for pump station 10, force main repairs. Review of proposals and award a contract with Interceptor rehabilitation, Seago Road to Shorewood Boulevard. Any questions on any of those items? Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
This is Commissioner Meyer. I'll second.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Eskridge, second by Commissioner Meyer to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None. Motion carries. Okay, that will take us to topics where Ben Nierad, to my right, will make a presentation on the 2025 operating capital projects and debt service budget. Ben?
Actually, Bill Walker, Interim Executive Director, I'm going to tee it up here a little bit. My job is to set the stage for Ben's presentation, and he'll give the details and the kind of the whys behind this budget. And then when he's done, we'll take questions and make sure next steps are clear. So I wrote my introduction here this morning by pretending that I was a commissioner and thinking about what questions I might have about the budget. And the first question that I would have is, what kind of budget is this? What are we about to see? And so my answer to myself is, this is a stability and responsibility budget. My job as Interim Executive Director is to avoid course changes, but to address important issues if possible. We are still in a high spending period because much of our infrastructure is from the 1970s and 1980s, and we're continuing to meet those spending needs in this budget. We're focusing on the core needs of the utility, reliable infrastructure, serving growth, adding frontline staff, and funding existing staff and programs that are key to our work. So that's the stability part. We're also trying to be responsible here by addressing some clear budgetary issues. One is limited clean water fund availability, which we're addressing by building some bonding into this plan. We're solidifying our cash flow and balance management approach with some guidance from our financial firm. We're reducing excess fund balances to reserve minimum targets. We're trying to do a better job engaging with the communities by additional meetings and explanations. So stability and responsibility is my characterization of this budget. My second question in this hypothetical commissioner role would be, so how do we know this budget is well supported? And the way I answer that is by considering the many hundreds of hours of staff and consultant work that went into this budget. I'm going to touch on some of them because I think they're important. This budget is grounded in financial figures from the 2023 audit, so it's built on that careful analysis. The core of this budget is the capital improvements plan. The large projects in that plan are supported by detailed, in many cases, multi-year facility planning efforts. Individual projects in that plan are backed by current business cases written by staff experts. Those business cases set the scope, the schedule, and the budget needed to meet the goal of that project. You can see summaries of those business cases in the budget document, and I want to highly encourage everyone to take a look at those summaries, give you a real sense of the projects that we're addressing. The CIP as a whole this year was given a full review by key staff led by Eric Dundee, District Principal Engineer. They were trying to make sure that this plan was feasible in terms of staffing availability. They were also looking for ways to delay less urgent projects to make room for the more urgent ones. On the operating side, operational budgets are based on director review of their ongoing needs, their existing budget, new needs, as well as ways to absorb new costs so that we didn't have to have an increase. Financial plan itself is supported by some analysis from PFM and our consultation with them. And finally, that is my department, Budget and Planning, did a full financial analysis, spending for all capital projects over the years, various borrowing options, forecasting of other revenue, analysis of different options for use of debt, interest rate, and growth forecasts. So the budget document does not repeat all of that work, lucky for you, but it has a lot of detail. And again, I highly encourage people who are interested in understanding this budget to take a look at the material in the document. My last question for my hypothetical commissioner self would be, what issues should I, might I as a commissioner be paying attention to here? So the budget document is our recommendation as staff, and it's consistent, in our opinion, with commission policy. But there are three issues that stand out for me, at least. And I'll just name them. Ben is going to go into details on them. We have a proposed new position for Director of Wastewater Operations and Reliability. One issue to consider is that a thing you want to keep in this budget? Deal with later. This budget has an approach to reserves management and lowering reserves at a certain rate. That rate and that approach something that you agree with. And this budget also has relatively high levels of borrowing, both for 25 and planned out in future years. Is that approach something that you're comfortable with? And I really do want to highlight or stress that those three factors, they're genuine commission policy issues. We as staff don't care about those things. So either way, what we care about is that we have arranged the resources that we need to meet the needs of the district. Okay, I want to pause and switch gears here before I turn it over to Ben to comment on something that you're going to hear at the end of the meeting after we've introduced the budget. Lisa Coleman and Theron, if Theron is here, I don't know if Theron's here. Theron's over there in the corner, are going to come and talk about what I probably irritatingly call Theron sinkhole, which is an issue we discovered in the Nine Springs Valley area. They're going to update you on that issue. Part of the update is our recognition that that situation is larger and more difficult than we originally thought. We are working to determine what needs to be done about that larger issue and how to fit that into the capital program. So in a nutshell, we're looking at options for taking some projects in that area that are less urgent and delaying them. That's a oversimplification, but that's what we're looking at. Here's the key point, and the reason I'm talking about this. That will not require a change in the 2025 service charge levels identified in this budget that Ben will present in a moment. It will likely require an amendment to the capital budget sometime later this year or early in 2025 to add in that new project. It might require additional service charges in future years, but that depends on how the rest of the capital program plays out over that time. Some projects may come in cheaper or slower than we thought and sort of offset the impacts of this. What I want you to realize here is that absorbing a new project like this, the whole point of having a multi-year capital plan and financial plan, and in particular, it is the point of having fund reserves, which again, Ben is going to talk about in a minute. Multi-year planning, reserves management is what saves you and us from having to make an abrupt change when a project like a new issue like this arises. And you experience this regularly throughout the year. You have us come periodically to add projects or change their total project cost on the capital side, and those never cause disruptions, immediate ones in service charges. So I mention that before Ben talks because we're introducing a budget at exactly the same time we're looking at adding a project. But we don't have to change, as I said, 25 service charges. And you don't have to have any concerns about that. I want to head off potential concerns that, what are you guys doing introducing a budget when you know something is happening? This is why we manage over multiple years to make that feasible. You control spending and revenues in all ways, but you have time to adjust. If we manage to get this stuff figured out in a couple weeks, we might update the budget tables before you approve the budget to reflect them, but we don't have to. That is enough from me. The details on the budget, I'm going to turn it over to Ben.
Good morning. Ben Neerad, Policy Advisor with the district, as Bill mentioned, here today to present on our 2025 budget. So what I have on the agenda for my presentation draws on the budget preview presentation from last month, going into a little more detail on some of the spending drivers and mitigating factors that make up the 2025 budget, the resulting proposed rate increase, and then I'll talk through next steps. Bill mentioned there's a lot more detail in the budget document that is now live on the district's website, madsewer.org/2025-budget. So certainly recommend that folks take a look at that. I tried to highlight what I thought were, important, impactful factors in the budget, but I couldn't include everything. So certainly recommend taking a look at that. So I'll start the presentation today with the spending drivers, right? So what are the factors that are driving district costs as we go into 2025? And I've categorized these into two different buckets, if you will. First, what I'm calling macro factors. These are kind of big picture factors that drive district spending, and then organizational needs, so maintenance needs, positions, wages, what have you. So starting with the macro factors on the left here, and I'm going to take aging infrastructure and population growth together because they're kind of playing a dual role here in terms of their impact on our capital program. So this graph likely looks familiar. This is something that Todd Giebert presented last month, showing the age of our Interceptor system, so the age of our sewer pipes. And I think what really stands out to me here is the amount of pipe in length. So that's what the y-axis is showing in the 1960s and 1970s, right? So our Interceptor system, a significant portion of it is now 50, 60 plus years old. I also want to talk about the treatment plant. So historically, the district has completed significant additions, what we call additions to the treatment plant. And there's a period of time here that I want to focus on from the mid-70s to the mid-80s, just briefly, that I think really demonstrate the challenges that we have today in terms of the age of our infrastructure. So I won't make you read the tiny little text here, but I'll note a couple of things from my own notes. So the fifth edition, 1973, 1978, included 8 primary tanks, 6 aeration tanks, 4 clarifiers, 2 sludge thickeners, so on and so forth. So a lot of infrastructure in that time period. 6th edition, 1976 to 1983, 3 digesters, a control building, the operations building, vehicle loading building. And 7th edition, 1980 to 1986, doubled the size of the treatment plant. So 3 aeration tanks, a clarifier, primary tanks, a lot of building going on in this time period, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this graph is showing something a little bit different than what the Interceptor graph was showing. So this is showing here the y-axis is spending instead of miles of sewer pipe, and you can see across the top those time periods where the 5th, 6th, and 7th edition construction was happening. What the bars are showing, and you can see that below, are levels of state and federal grant spending. So I want to emphasize a couple of points. One, it's grant spending. So we were getting significant amounts. So over this time period, $160 million adjusted for 2023 dollars in grants to essentially build huge components of this treatment plant. And you can see from an age perspective, we're in this 40 to 50 year age now in terms of where we sit today relative to this time period. Oh, question.
And Ben, how many grants are we getting now?
For our construction, essentially none. Yeah, right. Exactly. Good point. Yeah, so those grants are gone. And so this is a quote that I picked out from the American Society of Civil Engineers 2021 report card. Very interesting document, looks at all types of built infrastructure, but this quote specifically pertains to wastewater treatment plants. So you can see here, the majority of the nation's wastewater treatment plants are designed with an average lifespan of 40 to 50 years. So the systems that were constructed in the 1970s around the passing of the Clean Water Act in 1972 are reaching the end of their service lives, right? So this is not a Madison MSD issue. This is a national issue. And to Commissioner Eskridge's point, so the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. That brought significant levels of enhanced environmental regulation, which cleaned our waterways, undoubtedly a good thing. And it brought grant funding, right? So that helped us spend money to build out our treatment plant. That grant funding is now gone, right? So the options that we have today are loans and cash. That's really what it comes down to. The grant program was in essence replaced by revolving loan funds, so we get subsidized loans, right? And that's great, but they're still loans, right? We're not getting these grants anymore. They're not available to us. So in addition to the age of our infrastructure, we've got significant population growth in Dane County in particular. So this graph is showing population of the largest Wisconsin counties from 1970 to 2023. And to me, just that upward slope that you can see in Dane County, in particular starting kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s, really sticks out. You can see we're essentially going from roughly 300,000 population in 1970 to nearly double that, almost 600,000 in 2023. And the State Department of Administration just released 2024 estimates in terms of population growth, and it's significant, right? So this is not slowing down, right? So we've got these dual factors. We have aging infrastructure, 40 to 50-year-old treatment plant infrastructure that needs to be addressed. At the same time, we're dealing with basically the highest level of growth in the entire state on a population count basis, right? So if we don't address the condition of our treatment plant infrastructure and collection system, if we don't address population growth and build capacity into our system, we are not going to be able to perform as a district. We're not going to be able to meet our regulatory standards. We're not going to be able to convey wastewater, so on and so forth. So, question, yeah.
Yep, this is Commissioner Brooklyn. So just to be clear, the new infrastructure bill that came around, that doesn't include anything for wastewater treatment, is that right?
Essentially not for us, unfortunately. So there are multiple pieces of legislation that have been passed in recent years, and there is additional funding for water and wastewater infrastructure, but it's generally distributed based on financial need, right, from kind of an equity perspective. And Dane County is not a county that has financial need relative to many others in the country, and so we're generally not qualifying for essentially grants or subsidized funding in the way that some other communities are. Yeah, good question.
I've got a question, Commissioner Hobble. Is population growth the best metric to use, or is our flow? Because even though we've almost doubled in population, the flow is, until you get wet years, has basically remained about the same as when I started on the commission 30-some years ago. And I can understand the collection system probably, you know, has to be kept up because we're always reaching out further and further with our collection system. So it'd be interesting to see, for example, you know, like our map up there of the collection system, you know, kind of color-coded when sections were built. Because I think a lot of it was probably built, given the chart, in the 60s and 70s. Obviously, that's the stuff that comes up for repair 40, 50 later.
Sure. Yeah. So I can say we've looked very closely at that when looking at projected flows and loads as part of our projects, because we need to size our projects consistent with what we expect in the future, right? And we know that we have seen an effect of, you know, low flow toilets, more efficient plumbing, where we haven't seen as much growth and flow as you might expect from a population basis. But based on most recent analyses that were done with the help of consultants, engineering consultants, they're essentially assuming that we've kind of reached the low-hanging fruit, wrung as much efficiency out of that as we can, and now we'll see flows that are going to more closely track with population growth going forward. Good question. So capital projects drive this 2025 budget, right? We have $45 million in planned construction project expenditure, including $25 million that gets at that aging infrastructure, that gets at the condition of our infrastructure, and $19 million for, you know, addressing capacity, addressing this growing population. In addition, as mentioned, we're generally financing our capital program with loans, and so the budget includes $16 million in principal and interest payments to support these construction projects. In terms of the operating budget impact, we've got $9.4 million that's transferred from the operating budget, essentially in service charge revenue, to the capital fund to support our construction projects, and $14.3 million transferred to the debt fund to support principal and interest payments in the coming years. I want to go on, and that's in total, that's $1.7 million more in total transfers in 2025 compared to 2024. I want to go on just a brief tangent and address an issue that I think has caused some confusion, which is, you know, looking at these two numbers that I've highlighted, how is it the case, you might be asking, that we have $45 million in planned construction project expenditure, but only $9.4 million rather being transferred from the operating fund and service charges to the capital fund? So what's going on there? I'd like to just talk a little bit more about that point. So if we start with our capital fund, we're funding that, we've got $45 million, as mentioned, in construction expenses planned for 2025. We're funding that, as noted, with a $9.4 million transfer from the operating fund in essentially service charge revenues. We also have $4 million in connection charges. So these are the charges that are paid when new developments connect to the district's collection system and treatment plant. Those go right to the capital fund for construction projects, but obviously that still doesn't get us there. So the critical piece is we're assuming $34 million in loan revenue, right? So again, loans are really driving our construction program in terms of funding source. In terms of how we get that loan revenue, I think that's worth touching on too. So under the state Clean Water Fund loan program, so that's the program where we get subsidized loans, and that's where most of our financing is coming from. We have to spend construction dollars up front, right? So we're spending money on construction, and then once we have some of that money spent, we're submitting that to the DNR for reimbursement. So it's only after we've actually spent money on these projects that we can submit those to the DNR for reimbursement, And then after that, we're getting that loan revenue. So to that point, under the Clean Water Fund loan program, if we don't have project spending, then, we don't have loan proceeds and we don't have loan payments. For capital projects, service charges are generally paying for that upfront spending we need to do for cash funded projects. So some of our projects are funded by cash, a small portion, but some are. And then we need service charges for loan payments as well. But again, most construction expenses are ultimately paid for with loan proceeds.
And Commissioner Rummel has her hand raised.
Sure.
Hi, Commissioner Rummel.
Commissioner Rummel. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Can you clarify that in the Clean Water Fund, there's no interest payments? I would think that's the major difference, but I want to make sure I'm understanding. Thanks.
Sure. So it's a subsidized interest rate. So there are still interest payments that are part of the Clean Water Fund loan program, but it's a subsidized rate, and I'll actually touch on that specifically later on in the presentation. So again, if construction expenses don't meet goals, right? So that's been one of the questions of what happens then if we're not able to fulfill the goals for spending that we have, if we don't reach that, for example, $45 million goal for 2025. So first, again, any excess service charges are limited to what's needed for those upfront spending, cash funded projects, or debt payments, not total project expenditures. If we have extra money that will carry over for next year's project expenses and can't be redirected without commission authorization. And three, the district will not retain extra money indefinitely. So the next budget will reduce any excess reserves to the target. And, question.
So Commissioner Brooklyn, this is related to the last owner meeting that I attended, and the concern about the gap between the actual spending and the budgeted spending. So I want to really make sure that that gap is narrower going forward, because that was a big concern for owner communities. So in your address, I'd like to really understand how we are planning on narrowing that gap.
Sure. And I'll make two immediate points to that. One relates to the point that Bill made in his introduction, which is we put in a lot of staff time to ensure as best we can that the projects that we have scheduled for 2025 are achievable with current staff resources. So we've scrutinized, we've enhanced our scrutiny in terms of ensuring that we have staff capacity. So that's one point. Two, and it speaks to this third point here, well, we don't want to have that gap, right? We want to essentially reach what we have planned for expenditures, if for no other reason that we need to address the condition of our treatment plant infrastructure. If we underspend, it's not the case that we've raised that entire gap in service charges and haven't spent it. So the service charges that we would have raised are just a smaller portion that again relates to kind of this upfront spending, the debt payments, and cash funded projects. So I think those 2 points, just again, one in terms of the additional steps that we've taken to really refine our CIP to ensure it's as achievable as possible, and two, a clarification on the financing piece of it, that it's not that we're not raising that entire gap in service charges because our capital program is primarily funded by loan revenues that we only get if we are spending the money in reality. So, yeah.
All right, Ben, this is just such an important point, and so I want to drill into it as well. That last point that you made, and that you have as number 3 here, right? Year over year, we're also kind of truing up that and accounting for those gaps. Now, I think our owner communities have a fair point that when we have those gaps for long periods of time, it's still, you feel that cumulative pressure. And so we're trying, to your first point, to narrow that as well. But we are year over year also not taking extra, right? Because
Right.
we've done that. Can you just like say it again?
Yeah,
even?
right. So another way to think about it is if we've raised money for a project and don't get to that project, we don't need to raise that money again, right? The money stays in the fund. We don't need to raise service charges to pay for those project expenses because we have that still on hand. Yeah, important point. Correct. It rolls over, and we ensure that we're not getting beyond kind of the fund balance that we want to be at. Cool.
This is Bill again. There's a later slide that is going to, assume it's still in your presentation, visualize the getting down to the fund balance minimum point. So keep this thought in mind.
Yep, thanks.
Okay, so I missed that owner community meeting, but just the way I understand it is they were concerned that we had collected money for projects that we ended up not doing, and therefore the 9% rate increase, for example, could have been 7% or something. Yeah. And so then the way we address that is, I remember talking to Bill about that, ensuring that we have the capacity to do the project. Oh, things always pop up, you know, like that Interceptor over on the along McKee or by Goose Lake, I think it is. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. And just the final note I have here on point 3. So as Bill mentioned earlier, we've updated our capital fund reserve target. So I'll talk more about that later, but it relates to, again, that we're not keeping these excess monies indefinitely. To just continue on this message for just a little while longer. So this is actually a snapshot of the graph that we had shared at that owner community meeting that kind of spurred a lot of this discussion. So what you see here for 2024 on the right, we've got expected construction spending or what we expected in the budget, right? And again, mostly funded by loan revenues. We think in reality, in 2024, we'll have closer to $25 million in actual construction spending, again, mostly funded by loan revenues. And so this is the gap, right? This is the gap of concern. And again, just to emphasize the point, this is project spending that didn't occur, and only a small portion of that gap would be service charges. Most of that spending would have been loan funded. So to emphasize that point. Question?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Freeze. Thank you. So I have a question with regard, we know that the Clean Water Fund is short, right? So if you have a project that you plan to do and you didn't get to it, does your authorization, and you had already received Clean Water Fund, do we lose that authorization if we roll that into the next year, and you have to reapply, or, you know, what happens with that potential funding?
Oh, okay. So the question is, if we've applied to the Clean Water Fund loan program for a project, we get funding for it. So my understanding, and Bill or Todd behind me can correct me if I'm wrong, we can't finalize our Clean Water Fund loan agreement until we have a construction contract in place. Yeah, so for folks who might be online, so what Todd Giebert, our capital planning engineer, mentioned is that every year we have to submit intent to apply applications, essentially, or that intention to apply to the DNR for a project. So we'll be doing that for each project if we haven't gotten to it.
But the ultimate point is we're not running a risk of losing the opportunity to get loan funding for a project just because it takes longer to continue on.
All right. Oh, question? Yeah.
Yeah, Ben, is it possible to show exactly where the additional service fees that are charged and not spent, where that is going? If I'm a member community, I'd like to have that, see the math on that versus 25 versus 46 million. I understand where you're going with that, but
sure.
If there's $1 million extra in service fees charged, what did the district do with that? I think that might help answer this question for the member community.
Yeah, I can take that back. I know it can be a little bit hard to disentangle all the factors and get a bottom line number insofar as when we're going through the budgeting process, we're trying to essentially end with a capital fund balance at our reserve target. And so the transfers that we're making to the capital fund and the transfers that we're making to the debt service fund, I guess my point is it's a little bit hard to disentangle that, and I'm having a hard time even explaining why right now, but I get the point, and it's the math that I've been able to do shows we're essentially in kind of the probably $2 to $3 million range, roughly. That's a rough estimate in terms of what that service charge overage would be. And again, I guess I'll emphasize the point that any of that funding that's not spent is going to be in the capital fund, it's going to be in the debt service fund, and that means that when we go into the next year, that money is still there, so we don't need to raise as much in service charges in the next year.
So I understand that explanation. If I'm a member community, I'm still asking, then, why wasn't our increase at 3% versus 9%? Because the district brought in more in service revenue than they needed for their current year. So if the math is there, I would suggest we do our best to.
Sure.
Let's see.
Understood. Yeah.
What that
Okay.
looks like.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep going down our list of spending drivers and hit on this last macro factor, which is the loan interest rates. So our capital improvements plan targets about 80% debt-funded capital spending, 20% cash-funded spending over the 6-year planning window. You can see we're a little bit lower than that in 2025, but get to that essentially 80% point through the remainder of the years. Generally, we believe this is consistent with Commission policy that speaks to maximizing the use of Clean Water Fund loans when possible and balancing debt and cash funding. That being said, the Commission could elect to increase cash-funded spending, right? So this is a policy issue that Bill identified in his introduction. We could do more cash finance spending. The immediate trade-off, of course, is that additional future service charges would be required. So something to think about. We'll get to kind of the service charge path, and you can see what that looks like under this level of debt versus cash financing. But that's something for, again, the Commission to consider. As mentioned, historically, the district has used Clean Water Fund subsidized loans to fund projects, right? So that's a subsidized interest rate. We know that the Clean Water Fund program is likely oversubscribed for 2025, right? There's been a lot of new interest there. It's likely that higher rate general obligation bond revenues will be needed for some of our projects, and you can see to the earlier questions on interest rates, kind of how those compare, right? So the Clean Water Fund current interest rate is 2.365%, GO bond roughly 5%. Well, we would know the rate with certainty at the time of bond offering, but so it's significant, right? It's really more than 100% increase in terms of doubling that interest rate. Again, roughly 80% debt financed spending. Of that 80%, it's again roughly 80% Clean Water Fund loans and 20% higher rate general obligation bond funding. From an operating budget impact perspective, we have $130,000 in additional debt fund transfer in 2025 due to those higher interest payments, and over the full 6-year CIP, it's $2.8 million. Over that 6-year period, again, to pay those higher interest rates. So it's significant, even with this kind of 20% assumption. Now, we'll, again, maximize the use of Clean Water Fund loans. So if in 2025 the program isn't oversubscribed and we can get loans, we will, and that's certainly the case for all years of the planning window going forward. With that, I'm going to transition over to the organizational needs bucket here of our spending drivers and start with maintenance needs. So, we've got various operations and maintenance needs funded in the budget. These are things that are not rising to the level of full capital projects that would be in our CIP, right? Generally smaller dollar amounts, in some cases a one-time expense. So I wanted to provide just a few examples so you have a sense of kind of what's being funded in this budget. First, a portable generator for increased maintenance support to owner communities during widespread power outages. So we have a number of pumping stations throughout the district service area that help convey wastewater to the treatment plant. Some of those are owned by the district, some are owned by our owner communities, but we often help maintain those that are owned by our owner communities. And so we've had instances of power outages needing to power those pumping stations so that we can continue the flow of wastewater. And so portable generators included in the budget to help us ensure we have power at those pumping stations. Next, a plant grounds lighting project. So the goal here is to increase energy efficiency and safety for night operations, right? So we're a 24-hour operation and we need sufficient lighting to ensure that we've got, a safe environment for staff who are operating the plant overnight. And then the third I'll mention here is in terms of our collection system, doing what's called televising inspection and cleaning for hard-to-reach areas. So this is something that we do today with parts of our collection system, but we know we have areas that are just harder to get at, harder to reach, that nonetheless we need to inspect and understand the condition of. And so this would provide additional funding to do that. And there are more too, right? These are just a few examples that I wanted to pick out again that I think are instructive in terms of the type of funding that's provided here. In total, that's $1.5 million in increased operating expenditures for 2025. And I'll note, some of these are one-time expenses, right? The generator, the lighting, one time. The collection system, televising and cleaning would be an ongoing expense going forward. So it's a mix. Next, we've got a number of frontline positions that we are proposing as part of this budget. So first, an additional treatment plant operator to allow safer two-person shift coverage to be maintained while still allowing for absences. So it can be very difficult to maintain kind of that two-person coverage if we have staff out sick, on vacation, at training. So this individual, this role would help us better do that and assist in maintaining the treatment plant. We've got a collection system engineer position. So currently, responsibilities relating to basically, I would say, oversight of the collection system are spread across multiple staff members. This includes our project engineers, this includes planning staff. And so the idea here is to consolidate that work into one position, kind of have one point of responsibility for collection system monitoring. And in doing so, by taking some work off of the hands of our project engineers who are responsible for overseeing capital projects, this would help us increase that construction project throughput, giving them time to focus in on the CIP capital projects. And next, a waste acceptance coordinator. So a couple of things I'll mention here. So as noted, it accommodates increasing number of businesses in the region and addresses regulatory requirements. So we are required under state and federal regulations to permit what are called significant industrial users. So these are, businesses with high strength waste generally. And with a growing population, we've got a growing number of these businesses, and it's I think become increasingly difficult to really keep up with that with the current one FTE that's dedicated to that work today. So this would add an FTE to assist with that. We've got a maintenance planner. So a maintenance planning is part of the reliability-centered maintenance approach. So staff were here earlier this year presenting on kind of our RCM approach and the way that we're trying to mature and grow in that approach. A key piece of that is maintenance planning, right? So the idea is that you've got staff who are dedicated to understanding what maintenance needs are and can plan those out so that as our maintenance crews come to work each day, they've got kind of their schedule of work to do. We have maintenance planner coverage now with 3 of our 5 maintenance crews, and this would extend it to those additional 2 work groups, and in doing so, increase the throughput of maintenance projects. And then we've got finally here, a facility maintenance worker, which is a budget neutral contractor swap. So a few years ago, we ended doing custodial work in-house and instead contracted to do that because we could achieve a significant cost savings. Those contracted costs have increased fairly significantly, and so we're now at a point where it would exceed the cost of doing that in-house. In addition, the quality of work that we've seen under the contract has not been good. So the goal here would be on a budget neutral basis, basically, and the contract that we have for contracted custodial services, hire a district position to do that, and so have that position on a budget neutral basis, but hopefully, again, increase the quality of work output that we're seeing there. So that's what I have in terms of kind of those frontline positions. The last position here, and Bill mentioned this in his introduction, is restoring that Director of Wastewater Operations and Reliability position. So as the Commission will recall, the district reorganized in January of this year, resulting in the current director in that position being assigned duties of District Principal Engineer in addition to Director duties. Staff believe that the span of control and breadth of duties exceeds what any single person can manage. Right? There's really kind of a double duty happening here. The new position would assume the existing duties of the director and relieve the district principal engineer from both positions' responsibilities. So as Bill mentioned, the Commission may want to approve this now to provide the next executive director with the budget authority to fill this position. Alternatively, the position could be assessed following the hire of the next executive director, and budget authority could be requested later. So this is, again, something to highlight for Commission input consideration. So in summary, I'll note the budget document includes more detailed justifications for each position, including documentation of the work needs, priority and urgency, and the alternatives to address those needs that were rejected. I'll mention, additional position needs have been identified through work of our department directors, but the ones that are part of this budget are those that were deemed really, really most urgent. And hopefully you can see that in terms of understanding the clear connection to our core mission. From a budgetary impact perspective, we have $502,000 for the frontline positions, and then it would be an additional $208,000 for the Director of Wastewater Operations and Reliability Restoration. All right, and then lastly on the list of organizational needs, we have a wage market adjustment. So the budget includes a 3% market adjustment to wages, and this follows a market survey that was completed earlier this year that showed the district is generally in line with comparable organizations. So, I think the district has taken an approach to try and keep up with the market each year through market adjustments on staff wages. And so this is the 3% is what's being recommended. This came to us from our compensation consultant, and the budgetary impact of that would be $591,000 in operating expenditures for 2025. So that's what I have for the cost drivers. I'm going to transition now to some of the kind of partially offsetting mitigating factors. I've got these in two different categories: one, revenues and reserves, and two, again, kind of this bigger picture macro factor category. I'll start here with 2024 service charge revenues. So we know that Q1 and Q2 service charge revenues exceed what was budgeted by just over $1 million. And so we don't know yet, of course, what quarters 3 and 4 will bring. We know that we have some operational expenses that increased as a result of, some of the rainfall that also drove higher service charge revenues. But at this point, what we've reflected in the budget is what we know, which is we have an estimated increase of $1.1 million, essentially going into 2025, right? So that ends up with an increase to the 2024 closing balance, which then helps us decrease the service charge increase going for 2025. Oh, sure.
Okay, Commissioner Hobble, so you're expecting at least 1.1 million, or it could go down, but of service charge revenues. Wouldn't that go to cash reserves rather than being applied to 2025? I guess what I'm thinking about is, say, for example, we get another dry year next year, then all of a sudden our budgeted rates, instead of, normally being, say, 27 or 28 million, down to 25 million, are we creating a structural deficit then because we're using 1.1 million to offset budgeting?
I think the short answer is no, and that's really a benefit of doing the multi-year financial planning that we do. So what you'll see later is our projected service charge path for the entire CIP period. And so, we're taking into account this increased revenue, but as we move forward, we've got revenue assumptions that meet the expenses that we have. And I would say we're not creating a structural deficit here. We have a service charge path that we think is achievable that would, keep service charges consistent or slightly decreasing over the next six years. So my second category here is capital reserve drawdown. So mentioned this a couple of times so far, so I'd like to go into a little more detail on this. So a little bit of history first. In 2021, the capital fund balance went below reserve policy minimums. Following that, and given our expanding capital program that we've talked about today, the district increased service charges to increase our reserve amounts. This year, staff worked with our new financial advisor, PFM, to review reserve amounts and draw on best practices, right? So we were able to draw on their expertise, look at how other similar wastewater utilities approach capital fund reserves to understand, is the amount that we have in there now, does that make sense, or can we draw that down, or would it potentially need to increase? But based on their advice, our review, we believe we can draw down our capital fund reserves from where they sit today. And so you can see what that path looks like over the 6-year CIP planning window. The dark black line is each year's closing balance. The dashed gray line is our new calculated reserve amount. So generally, what we want to do then is have our closing balance essentially match that reserve amount so that we would end each year being at that reserve amount, which is essentially it's calculated. It's keyed to future capital spending. So as our capital program expands, the reserve would increase commensurately to a degree. On the graph, again, the green shaded area in the middle is reflecting the fact that, especially in future years, we might not always be exactly on the line, but in any given year, like the budget year, we would seek to be on the line. Now, we're not there now, right? Even under the 2025 and 2026 plan, we're not dropping immediately right down to that reserve target. And what I want to emphasize here is that we did it on a multi-year basis to smooth service charge increases. So we could draw down those reserves sooner, excuse me, and bring that dark black line essentially in future years down to that dash line. The thing to understand and think about, however, is that when we do this multi-year planning and we lower that black line, it essentially lowers the entire CIP planning period, right? So you could lower in 2025, but then every year subsequent to that is also lower, which means you need to have higher levels of service charge increases in the future to kind of get back up to where you want to be. So, you know, you could have a scenario where you draw that down in 2025 and maybe you've got a low single-digit service charge increase as a result, but likely going into the subsequent year, you're going to be more like a double, you know, 10+% service charge increase at that point just to get kind of back up to that line. And so the approach that we took in the budget reflects the interest that we've heard in terms of having smooth service charges to not have a lot of that kind of level of variability year to year. But again, this is something that the commission can consider, give us feedback on. You know, we could go faster, but again, that would likely result in much higher levels of service charge increases in future years.
Yeah, I got a question. So the gray dash line, so you're expecting basically the capital improvement plan spending to stay flat from 2027 to 2030?
It's pretty consistent over the 6-year CIP window in the roughly $40 to $50 million range. Okay. Yeah.
And so if we approach the 50, then our cash reserves have to go up a little more than your black line. If we go closer to the 40? It's hard for me to read the numbers from. Oh, reserves, okay.
Yeah, right.
But if the reserves are staying flat, which they look like, that means to me that because they're normally a percent of the money that we spend, right? Mm-hmm. That our capital projects are commensurate with that, so
right.
The reserves that flat, it would indicate to me that our capital project spending will be flat.
That's correct. Yep.
I just want to say that in past years, there were a few times the district did use flattening technique. Don't ask me when. It was when we were a 5-member commission to, you know, kind of, there were even times when we borrowed from the cash reserve fund to lower the rate increase that we had. Then there are times that we got into trouble for doing that. Yeah.
And Ben, help me understand again, who sets the fund reserve level? Is that the state, the Fed, is that the commission?
It's a district policy decision. So on the debt fund side, right? So we have 3 funds. We have operating fund, debt fund, and capital fund. On the debt fund side, that balance is set under state requirements under the Clean Water Fund Loan Program, where we need to have basically a closing balance to pay for next year. But on the capital side, we have discretion.
And does that affect our bond rating, or?
So we talked to PFM about that because that was a concern, and they essentially said that given that we have the ability to raise property taxes, not that we intend to, but we have that ability, it means that some of these fund balance issues are relatively less important from a rating perspective.
Yeah, that would be my guess too. I mean, even though we're a taxing authority, we're still one separation away from the end user and the ratepayer, meaning that $32 million in cash seems, I'm asking as a commissioner, I'm asking why do we need that? Help me, you know,
go ahead.
You don't have to answer that
Sure.
today.
No, I think if you want to go ahead.
So Bill Walker, let me comment on that. The main point here is, Ben and Todd and I have talked about this. We would like to come back with a study session at some point to actually go into our reserve policies to address this question, make sure they're right, make sure people understand them. But the short answer here is that dotted line is PFM's advice for how to make sure you are able to manage the flow of your cash in the face of risks like delayed loan proceeds, additional projects, et cetera. So this is a risk management line.
And that's been reviewed.
Yes, that dotted line is PFSM's literal advice to us based on their review of our situation and their knowledge of, I don't know how many, like 30 different utilities at least that they looked at.
Yeah, that's my question, is why, trying to think through the scenarios that we'd need $30 million for.
Well, so the thing to understand here is to go back to Ben's point about how we spend money on projects and then we get money from the Clean Water Fund. Those swings can be tens of millions of dollars. So a little delay in Clean Water Fund revenue can put you underwater.
So it's cash flow.
Yes.
Yeah, we need the cash flow to be able to pay for the projects before we get reimbursed. Commissioner Rummel have it? Commissioner Rummel, then Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I serve on this Madison Finance Committee and I have our city budget in my brain and they're constructed differently. So please help me, because to the answer to the last question, I heard that we have 3 sets of fund reserves, operating, debt, and capital. And can somebody just help me picture what that means? Because on our city budget, we only, I believe, have an operating budget reserve. So I want to make sure I understand.
Sure. So, right, to your point, we are structured, we have 3 funds: operating fund that takes in our service charges and generally pays for operating expenses, our debt fund that's paying for debt service, and our capital fund that's paying for construction projects. We have reserve approaches for each fund that attempts to target the risk that each fund experiences. So on the operating fund side, we have a 180-day reserve in terms of cash on hand to address operating cost overages or reductions in service charges. So that's the approach on the operating fund. Debt fund, as mentioned, we have a state requirement where we need to have essentially a closing balance each year to pay for next year's principal and interest payments. And so that really defines our approach on reserves for the debt fund. And then the capital fund, which we're talking about now, kind of being attuned to risk of, to cash flow risk on the capital project side of things. So it's 3 different funds with 3 different reserve approaches, but I think that the commonality across all 3 is we're trying to identify the level of risk that each fund experiences and set a reserve approach for each that attempts to mitigate those risks.
Before Brad goes, I just wanted to mention that Sarah Eskridge left the room, but she's participating via phone. Commissioner Eskridge, and Commissioner Wilson had to leave. He was participating virtually. So just to make everybody aware of that. Brad?
So there's an owner community meeting, meeting coming up, right?
Yep.
On the budget. And are you planning to present this to the owner communities? I'm sure you are.
Yes, this or a version of it, yeah.
And if they're, one of the main concerns of the owner communities as far as our budgeting is concerned is the increase in service charges from year to year. I think that we're always looking for opportunities to minimize that to the extent that we can. And one way to do it is to use some of our reserves, which is being proposed in this budget. We could choose to use more reserves, and this graph shows that we could, there's a gap of, what, $10 million between what
about that.
we'll have on hand and the target for next year. So, I mean, we could choose to use that. And as you said, that'll probably affect service charge increases going forward.
Correct.
So I just hope that the owner communities will have an opportunity to kind of understand the choices that we're going to have to make and weigh in on those as well and provide us with recommendations on what they would prefer. I mean, there's the ability to significantly reduce service charges for 2025 if we choose to. We could also delay increases in, adding staff. Instead of 6 new positions, we could choose to add none next year, understanding the impact of, saving that $700,000. I don't think it would have a very significant impact on service charge increases, but understanding what the impact is, I think, would be important for the owner communities as well as the commission.
Sure. Makes sense.
Is it possible you could provide to us what the effect of reducing the, capital fund sooner would have, in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, I know they've done this in the past, is give us what, like, every $100,000 change, or 200 or 50 or whatever number you come up with in reduction to budget. For example, Brad mentioned if we got rid of the 6 positions, we saved $750,000 or something. So what, every $100,000, whatever increment you choose, what's that reduction in the service charges?
Yeah, and it's roughly, so we're at a budgeted $55 million base in service charges, so roughly every $550,000 is 1%.
1%.
But, yeah.
So if, I don't know what we're at right now, say we're at 9%, you got rid of all those positions, you're talking 1.25% or something.
Roughly.
Yeah, if we were to cut out all, if we said we're not going to fund these 6 positions.
But, yeah, and I'll get to the resulting service charge increase in just a moment. We're below 9%, so just 7.5, yep. Amanda. So I'm going to transition now into the macro factors for the mitigating factors. And again, these are kind of some bigger picture issues that are impacting the district's finances. So starting with interest earnings, you can see here, and apologies for the small text, this is the Federal Reserve rate. So this is, I think everyone is aware now that the Federal Reserve has increased rates over the last year or so in a way that we really haven't experienced, as you can see, since before 2008 at this point. That's the large gray stripe, vertical gray stripe on the left is 2008, and then 2020 is the smaller gray stripe on the right. So you can see rates have been increasing, and that means that we have additional interest earnings on district cash, right? So our cash is sitting in accounts. Those accounts accrue interest, and the interest rate has really been historically in recent years kind of, essentially close to zero. But now with the rate increases, we have more interest earnings. So in terms of the budgetary impact, we have about $400,000 in additional revenue, both in terms of 2024 above what we expected for this year, and then for 2025 as well. So that's helping us as we go into the 2025 budget. And then finally, connection charges, kind of a macro factor here because it relates to development, right? Again, these are connection charges are the charges that are levied when new development connects to the district's treatment system. And so continued development in the district has led to higher than anticipated connection charge revenues. You can see here, this is interesting, Dane County building permits, and you can see we're not quite at that high level that we were in, I think it's 2021 there, that more recent peak, but we're above kind of historic averages. And so in terms of budgetary impact, that's $1.4 million in additional projected 24 revenues and $1.5 million in additional 25 revenues. And again, those funds go to our capital fund to support our capital construction program. So with all of that, now we're finally at the proposed rate increase. I'm going to just kind of show this to you how this builds up piece by piece. We've got additional detail on this in the budget document, but you can see we're starting with essentially offsetting additional revenue here. That's it's a negative value because it's kind of offsetting what the service charge increase would be of negative 2.8%. Capital program support, those transfers to the capital and debt funds are 3.1%. Cost of business adjustments, this includes factors like energy and chemical costs that have increased. The labor market adjustment I mentioned is at 3%. And then additional needs. So these are the maintenance projects that I talked about, the positions that were discussed. There's more in here too, IT security improvements, for example, but that's in that last category. And then that gets us to a 7.5% increase on total, so about $4 million over 2024 in terms of budgeted service charge revenues. I want to look now at our forecast. So you can see we had 9% budgeted increase in 2024, down to a 7.5% increase in 2025. And then you can see what roughly the rest of the period looks like. You know, we have this as kind of a shaded area because there can be variation here, right? We're doing a projection. There's things that could drive those up, things that could drive those down, but you can see, you know, we're generally in the same with a slight decrease over time. And I think a way to think about that is, again, we're kind of working our way up to this high level of capital spending, again, this $40 to $50 million roughly amount, and we're going to be continuing that, you know, essentially through the 6-year planning window. So that allows us to kind of slow those increases over time and perhaps in the 6% range in 2030, which may be kind of the range we're in for a little while going forward, just based on, you know, debt service, operational expenses, what have you going forward. But this is what we're currently predicting for the 6-year CIP planning window. In terms of impact on an average household, that's $283.81 in district-only charges are estimated for 2025, and that's $17.19 more than in 2024, which is about, I believe, a 6% increase. I want to contextualize the service charge growth, just looking at this in a couple of different ways. First, you know, we can look at, and apologies again for the small text here, these are the most recent service charge increases. So the 7.5% on the far right that we just looked at, last year's 9%, and then 8.9% the year before that. One interesting way to look at this is on a per capita basis, right? So if we look at that revenue amount on a per capita basis, when we have population growth, that essentially decreases what the increase is on a per capita basis, right? We don't have a way under our revenue system of kind of automatically adjusting for population growth, right? So this is just a way to analyze that, to quantify that. So you can see we're down in kind of the 5, 6 to 7% range on a per capita basis, which reflects a growing population in the district service area. We can also look at this in terms of what are the average charges for our communities, right? So those charges include both the district charges and then what they're adding on for their own sewer system expenses. You can see here, for example, Madison plus district charges has been pretty low the last couple of years. And I know, for example, in 2024, they had additional population from the town of Madison coming into the city of Madison, or most of it. And so that helped them spread charges across more people. So in the case of Madison, those average charges were actually quite a bit lower than ours, but that's not always the case. So another comparison is Waunakee. And you can see the 2024 story in particular was very different, where their average charges were above our total increase in service charge revenue. And we were predicting for them an increase in charges of about 11%. And that's reflecting that their flows and loads were increasing at a rate that's really higher than other communities. So it reflects population, industrial growth, what have you.
I'm just wondering, the green and pink, are they comparable to the blue or to the red? Are they per capita or are they total?
So these are average household charges. So, it's kind of a percentage comparison. It's not directly comparable in terms of what it's representing though. And then another way that we've tried to contextualize our charges in the past is to look at our charges combined with the city of Madison and how those compare to Midwest and national averages. So this is based on survey data of a survey done every year by National Sewer Association, NACWA, for folks who are familiar. You can see for 2023, the most recent year we have data, we were at average per household charges of $417 compared to Midwest average of $547, national average of $588. So I think we still compare well in terms of those other regional and national averages. So that's what I have really for the presentation today. In terms of just briefly next steps, as mentioned, for next week, we'll be sending estimated charges to communities. So this is a practice that commissioners may remember we started last year, where we send estimated service charges to communities based on kind of the budget as introduced. And the goal here is to provide them with a number earlier in their own budgeting process, right? So what we heard when we had our service charge work group a couple of years ago that looked at our service charge program was, you know, they're doing their own budgeting rate setting process roughly at the same time that we are. So any earlier that we could send charges, the better. So, you know, we caveat these when we send them out. We say that this is subject to commission decisions on the budget, so this can change, but it's a number for them to get before the final estimate, which is provided after budget approval at the end of October. So those will go out next week. As mentioned, on Monday, staff are going to be presenting on the budget to the Dane County Cities and Villages Association Executive Council. So that's an opportunity for our owner communities to learn more about what's in our budget and provide feedback. September 26th, the commission has a public hearing and deliberation on the budget. October 11th is the deadline to receive written comments, which can be submitted to amandaw@madsewer.org. October 17th is the date for commission deliberation and final direction on the budget. And then finally, October 31st, commission adopts 2025 budget and rates. So that's what I've got for today. I'm happy to address any other questions if there are any.
Okay, anybody have any questions? Any questions? Don't see any questions, and Marcia have her hand up or anything? No? Okay, good. So that will move us to consider and possibly take action on recommendations of the Executive Director Search Committee. I don't know that there's anything the Commission has to act on, but I do want to give you an update on what we discussed. First of all, the subcommittee basically directed me to work with Stafford on a contract for the new executive director position. So they'll be Vanessa and Paul will be setting up a meeting with Pamela and myself to discuss things that we need to do and stuff like that. Secondly, we started discussing first-year goals. I gave the subcommittee some homework that I've asked them for by next Wednesday. Their 2 or 3 ideas on the best first-year goals for the executive director. Reftellus had put something together. We weren't real happy with it. And then I'll collate and forward that back to Reftellus. We talked about the onboarding process. And as you know, generally, Ezra and I have been meeting with the past executive director and the deputy executive director typically twice a month, the Monday before our Thursday meeting. So we're going to continue that, and that's kind of the touch point. Plus, we may extend, Ezra and I may extend time then with the new executive director for half hour or whatever to touch base, see how things are going, what the position may need assistance with or what they see is going well or not. In addition to that, at the 90-day period, the executive director, we've had the quarterly meetings with the past executive director, if you recall, on performance. We're going to continue that at 90 days with the commission meeting with the new executive director at that 90-day interval. And then we also decided to add in a meeting with the commission with the deputy director and the chief principal engineer. So that'd be currently are positioned by Bill and Eric. And that we would then meet with them as well to discuss the performance evaluation. And that we see that as kind of a one-point touch point. And at some point, we'll probably transition back to the BJ model where BJ does the content. Let's see. The next thing we have to do further work on the panels that will be occurring on the final interviews. So we're going to probably do that on October 17th. We're not going to have a meeting on the 26th, so the 17th of October will be our next meeting. And that will be also where we get information from Ref Telus on how the candidate submission process is, how many candidates we're getting. So that takes us to dates. So I talked about October 17th. That meeting's at 7:30. So we'll hear about the candidates in the first. We'll discuss further the first-year goals. And we may have the first-year goals wrapped up by then, though. And November 7th is where the subcommittee will meet with Ref Telus for the candidate review, where they will give us information on candidates that have submitted so far and the review process and how they're kind of ranked. And at that point, we'll also talk about questions and any interview panels that we have beyond the commission. So all commissioners are invited to attend that meeting. Just be aware that we'd want you there for the whole meeting, not popping in and out. So that's probably an all-day, I think was 3 hours, but it was all morning long. Then that takes us to 11/21, so these are changed dates that I think Mike Lipsky has sent an email out about. So 11/21 are the first interviews, and we'll probably interview maybe 6 candidates. That's 6 or more. The names don't have to be public. 5 or less, the names become public. We may choose to do 6, although we'll find out more what the candidate interest is. That meeting will be virtual, and it will probably be all day. So again, all commissioners are invited to attend, but be aware that we don't want you popping in and out. So it could start at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. depending on the number of candidates we choose to interview for the first round.
Just curious,
Yeah.
5 or less, the names are public.
Yes.
Where does that, is that state law or what? It's state law.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep. I don't know why the number has anything to do with it, but, okay, that takes us to December 9th. That's a Monday. That will be all day. And Ref Telus has apparently come up with some kind of draft outline of how the day will proceed. Candidates will be given tours. The candidates will meet in small groups with some of the commission. The candidates will meet with 1 or 2, probably 2 or more, maybe more panels as to, and then the commission will meet with those panels, get feedback, or get the results of their feedback, and then the commission itself will do another round of interviews. So they have that right, Mike? So the commission will have basically, each commissioner will have 2 touch points with the candidate that day, one in a small group session, depending, maybe groups of 3, or it could be a group of 4 and a group of 5. And then we'll have the final touch point with the final selection of the final interview that will occur after we get the additional information. And then we will discuss and make our selection, hopefully, as to who we wish to be the executive director. One other thing, come October 17th, because we'll be dealing with candidates, The only staff member that we will be dealing with will be either Janelle and or Cassie. We will not have Mike or Bill, who have been attending the meetings, and that's the idea, is to keep it a nice and clean break, because if we have any internal candidates, we don't want to be anything to be painted, so to speak, by that. So that kind of gives us, so we have a little more work to do on the goals for the first year, and then on the panels that we'll be working with Ref Telus on. Hopefully get those wrapped up in early November. And then that will kind of get into that process for hiring. And hopefully, I don't know how long it'll take an agreement to be drafted, but hopefully we'd have one before December. So, any questions? Ezra?
I might just say, at the risk of over heavy-handedly emphasizing this stuff, we're trying to invite all commissioners to attend anytime you want to through this process, and that's great. November 7th, November 21st, I'd call you optional. Come if you want. December 9th, mandatory. if that's not too strong a word. We want everyone there all day on December 9th, even if you don't do anything prior to that. So I'm just making sure that's crystal clear.
Yeah, thank you, Ezra. And that's in person. So everybody here in person. And there are different rooms that are being reserved now in different buildings for the different processes that are occurring with the panels, the commission, and so forth. So, yeah, thank you, Ezra, for making that. Everybody here, December 9th. Okay. That will then take us to the Executive Director report. Bill?
Ready. Bill Walker. I have a couple things here. First is to make you aware that we had a treatment facility overflow on September 4th, roughly 7 p.m. This was treated effluent in the Headworks building. Even though it was treated, any discharge of treated effluent anywhere other than our outfalls is reportable. The cause was a drain valve that was left closed after maintenance activity. The overflow was contained to the plant, did not propose a risk to the public, and we have followed the DNR notice and compliance reporting requirements. I think in the interest of time, Mike, I'm going to do the wage questions here. We talked about the wage study finding that our system is in alignment. You had two questions. One is, how frequently should a wage study be done? Carlson Detman recommends every 3 years, which we will look to do going forward. And the other question was, why have we stayed in alignment? And what I speculated earlier is correct. It is the fact that we have done annual market adjustments based on the consultant's recommendation, looking at the market. Last thing is actually from Amanda Wegner to talk about campaign update.
I'll make this brief. Amanda Wegner, Communications and Public Affairs Director. So I wanted to make the Commission aware that we launched this week an infrastructure campaign, a public campaign from the district. And the goal of this is really in some ways tied to the budget and what Ben spoke about earlier in terms of aging infrastructure and condition, and that being a massive driver for the district and quite honestly, sewer utilities around the nation. But our goal here is to, generally people don't think about their wastewater infrastructure. It just happens, right? And so one of our goals with this is just to get people to start thinking about that. So we have this new campaign that we just launched. It's really about creating curiosity and driving people and awareness to come and learn more about the district and our website. And we're doing digital billboards, bus wraps, a lot of social, and then some more lo-fi type things with kiosks and posters. And we have 4 different pieces of creative. So you can see them here, all kind of really just getting people to think like, what does that mean? And then our role in this. So you'll be seeing these around the service area. Some of the digital billboards are kind of outside the immediate Madison area. We really focused on making sure we could get as much coverage throughout the service area as possible. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about these. We also have posters if you want. If you want some, just let me know, and you can take them and hang them up in your communities. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Then, Nine Springs Valley Interceptor, Mineral Point, Theron, you have a brief update for us on your sinkhole?
Thank you, President Hubble. Good morning, everyone. I'm Theron Jacobson, project engineer with the district. I'll give you an update on the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor Mineral Point Pipe Investigation update. Thank you. So the agenda, introductions, the location, it's the same as the previous three presentations that were given. The only addition that I'm going to talk about is the trenchless point repair location, which is downstream of the initial pipe repair that was done. I'll go over the action items completed, the ones in process, next steps, and then I can take any questions just along the way. The action items completed, the initial televisings that were done, and then subsequent ones that we did throughout the bypass pumping operations that was needed to facilitate the repair, the removal of the pipe, and then the construction of the pipe repair. The image on the right of the screen is the actual day that the major pipe repair where the replacement pipe was installed. That was Friday, August 9th that image of is. And then the image on the lower left is just the following week as everything was backfilled and the site was cleaned up. And after the repair was done on the 9th, the flow was reintroduced to the pipe. The bypass system is still out there. It's not in operation, but that's part of the next steps I'll get to. So the action items that are in process, next week we're actually facilitating the heavy cleaning that is going to be done on the pipe and then actually taking care of two other joints that need repairs. That'll be a trenchless point repair that'll be done on two joints that are downstream of the section that we repaired, but it'll be in the same segment so we can use a lot of the infrastructure, the temporary infrastructure that's out there to facilitate the repair. So it'll be a trenchless operation, unlike the previous one was a full open cut, so robotic entry. And after that is done, we'll remove the bypass system and site restoration will occur. Next steps, I kind of talked about those, but in addition, discussions will be had with the contractor regarding the pipe repair, potential change order regarding the pipe repair, and then a known change order on the trenchless point repair. So those two trenchless point repairs are, the needs of those are much different than the one that we repaired previously. That was a complete shear pipe failure. These are offset joints that are more manageable. There's other technologies that are available for us to facilitate the repair to reduce the risk of that pipe in the short term. It's not a long-term fix, it's a short term. But Lisa will be providing an update under the capital improvement plan through her presentation to give you some updates on this pipeline and the upcoming capital improvement projects that Bill also referenced earlier in the budget presentation. And I can take any questions.
Okay, any questions? I've got one. What are you talking about when you say trenchless point? Are you doing like a lining or is it grouting of the joints or what is it?
Yeah, thank you. It is a short liner, so it'll be trenchless entry from the endpoints. So no person entry also, so the full robotic. So when we talk about trenchless, that means no excavation at the surface. So it's much less disruptive to the public. Luckily, this pipeline is not under a road. It's adjacent to US Highway 18151, so there's risk associated with that. But this is the best solution for the point repairs that need to get done.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Lisa Coleman?
Good morning. Now we go. There we go. Good morning. I'm Lisa Coleman. I'm the Director of Engineering, and I'm going to provide a kind of an overall capital projects update this morning. And I'll see if I can get this new thing to run. Hey, look at that. Works. Awesome. So here's what I'm planning to talk about today. Sort of an overview of all of the projects in the planning, design, construction phases, talk about the projects completed this year, give a little bit of a cost update, and then a couple of project highlights. So my presentation today is a little bit updated format based on, responding to some of your comments on previous presentations that I've given. It's revamped a little bit to better align with kind of the format of the CIP in the budget to give an overall update on progress. I do think in the interest of time, I might breeze through some of the kind of overall things because I really want to get to some of the kind of project highlights at the end. So I'll go through the kind of overview stuff a little bit quickly, but certainly feel free to stop and ask a question or stop me if you want more information. Okay, so in the planning phase here, we've got and I'm not talking about every single project here. I'm just kind of talking about the major stuff in the CIP. So during the planning phase, we've got 2 treatment plant projects, 2 interceptors, and 2 pumping station and force main projects. And you can kind of see the stoplight colors there that are sort of, how it's going. We've got 2 at the plant, 2 interceptors, 2 pumping station force mains. Let's see, I'll just talk briefly about maybe I'll talk about the yellow or the red ones. Let's see. Pump station 16 is red because we're not actually actively working on that. That was moved to a later year in the budget. 9 Springs Valley Interceptor, we're working on the RFP and adding a separate phase 2, which is related to what Theron was just talking about. So I've got a little bit more detail on that that I'll talk about at the end of the presentation here. And then the West Interceptor on Regent Street, that's red because it's kind of coordinating with some City of Madison projects that are actually happening later than we thought. So those are kind of, it's out there, but it's kind of sitting on the back burner. All right, in design. So here we have a lot in the hopper that we're working on here. 3 at the treatment plant, 5 interceptor projects, and 1 pumping station and force main project in design. Again, the stoplight colors are kind of indicative of how things are going. Liquid processing phase 2 is yellow, just because it's a pretty involved process and project, and there's, schedule is taking a little longer than we had expected and having some cost increases. So I'll talk some more about that. That's one of the project highlights I'll talk about at the end. For the lagoon dikes, we're making good progress there, but that one is yellow because of regulatory challenges, which you guys have heard me talk about that before with it being a Superfund site. There's some permitting intricacies there, I will say. So we will have a contract amendment coming up on that one for detailed design that you'll see coming up soon on that project. Let's see, Lower Badger Mill Creek phase 6 is yellow. That one, you guys have heard me talk a lot about that one. There's a lot of challenging alignment there and real estate challenges with private property easements and some cost increases due to the difficult alignment. So that one shouldn't come as a surprise that that's a challenging project for us. Let's see, Northeast Interceptor Truax, that one is yellow because we've sort of reprioritized and delayed that to a later date to accommodate adding an additional project related to the repair that Theron was just talking about, which again, I'll touch on in a few minutes here. And then finally, the emergency power generation one that you see down at the bottom is delayed in the 2025 budget, so that's why it's red. Basically moved it out later to reprioritize other projects. All right, and then I will talk about a green one. I'm only pointing out all the yellow and red ones here, but the Southeast Interceptor Rehab Phase 1, that's out to bid on right now. And so you should be seeing us returning to you to accept bids hopefully in the next month. All right. So here's a map of jumping into construction. So here's a kind of a map of some of the projects we have happening in construction. So I'm showing 3 treatment plant projects in blue there, and then there's 3 interceptor projects in purple, and 3 pump station and force main projects in teal. So lots going on. I'll talk a little bit more about those on the next slide. So under construction, the 3 projects at the treatment plant, and then 3 interceptors, and then 3 pumping station and force mains. And you can see them here listed with the stoplight colors. So we've got a lot of projects, as you know, just starting up, because you remember all of our accepting bids over the last couple of months. So those are all green. There hasn't really been time for anything to go south with those yet. So, for pump station 4, that one's yellow. There's been some equipment delays on that one. There's a lot of major electrical equipment. It's taken quite some time to kind of come through the supply chain. But finally, that major electrical equipment is arriving on site. So that should fall into place, and then we should be wrapping that up in the first half of next year. So that is good news. Pump station 17 force main relief phase 2 is yellow, as we have the emergency repair that Theron was just talking about, and so we will have a couple of large change orders coming related to that project. So one of those large change orders being the actual emergency repair of the pipe that he was showing. The second, which will be less, will be the trenchless point repair that he was also discussing. And obviously, we have policies related to that with commission approval. So, once change orders exceed 5%, we would bring that to the commission per our policy. So I anticipate that those will start getting into that range. All right, projects completed this year. So I'm showing 5 projects here. These are the projects. We've obviously got a lot of smaller, maintenance kind of projects and other things around, but these are kind of the big ones. These are the projects you've seen come through the commission with acceptance of work already this year, except I cheated a little bit here, and the West Interceptor Shorewood Relief Phase 1, you guys actually haven't approved. You haven't accepted the work yet, but that should be coming up in the next month. So, we're crossing a few things off the list here, so that feels good. All right. And I won't talk a lot about this. We've had a lot of talk already about budget today, so but I just wanted to provide a slide that kind of shows our bidding costs on some of the major projects this year. So, remembering that construction is sort of the lion's share of the cost of a project. So what we've got listed here is the bid costs as well as the total project cost. And remember, the total project cost also includes, engineering, district time, permitting, any kind of equipment we need to buy, that kind of stuff. So the intent here is really just to show you, you win some, you lose some, right? So most of the bids have come in such that we're well within line with the project cost, but there's a couple where we've needed to request increases in total project cost as the bids were accepted. So, generally things sort of balance out over time, and you kind of win some, you lose some. So, all right. Okay, sorry to breeze through that so quickly, and I'll talk a little bit more in depth here about a couple of different projects. And again, if you have questions on any of the other stuff, you can certainly ask, or you can always reach out to me later as well. All right. So liquid processing improvements phase 2. This is a large project that I've talked with you before about. When I last updated you back in May, we had discussed, where we were discussing the choice for the B&R process or biological nutrient removal. So that is essentially the biological process that happens in the red tanks in the top picture on the slide. So one of our objectives is to try to run at lower dissolved oxygen, or essentially less aeration, to try to save on power costs. And after a lot of analysis, and we talked about this the last time, that's kind of where we were sitting, we've confirmed that a hybrid option will work. And we also confirmed another kind of wild card that we were talking at the time when I talked to you last about it, was whether or not we would need another primary tank. And we've determined that we will not need another primary tank, so that's good news. And that was an outstanding question when we talked last. So with the hybrid option, this means we can run the plant with low DO And then as flow and loadings increase over time, we can essentially turn it up and run it in high DO and still meet our effluent limits. So the con here is that that's about a $6 million additional in capital cost. But for that, we get what we think are several advantages. So some of those advantages are, again, reduced energy demands, probably a 15% reduction or so, our consultant is telling us, during the times when we're able to run in low DO. Gives us greater potential to meet possible future effluent nitrogen limits. So we know that's probably coming down the pike. And we think with, we probably have a better chance at not doing as major of changes once that arrives using this option. So again, we don't have a crystal ball, but we feel like this gives us potentially more of a fighting chance, let's say. All right, operational flexibility. It gives us the flexibility to adjust to treatment demands over time. So again, as those flow and loadings change, we can change how we're running our process. So, you know we're probably likely not going to be able to run in low DO the entire time. We know we'll probably have to, as loadings and flows increase, we probably won't be able to run in low DO the entire time. But this gives us a chance to learn and adjust as we go. And I think the learning is an important point. I mean, we have mentioned before that this is a new technology. And we also know that, we're going to need a major plant expansion around 2050. And so this gives us a chance to learn more about this new technology in advance of us, starting to work on that major new plant expansion. Okay, and lastly, maintenance. We think it does provide a little bit of an opportunity for decreased maintenance with decreased process pumping demands. So that's kind of the update on the low DO hybrid option. Schedule and status. So we are right now in preliminary design. We're wrapping that up. We hope to have the preliminary design report this month. We are scoping the final design with Strand. So that will come to commission for approval of a contract amendment yet this fall, we hope. And then that would put us into design in 2025, likely into 2026, with construction to follow after that. So this is an expensive project, a large project. And if you look in the budget, there's actually a number of sub-projects that make up this one larger project. So related to that, though, we're working on kind of the last piece as we're scoping out the kind of preliminary design, getting into final design. We are reviewing a comprehensive list of closely related aging assets and determining what makes most sense to include with this project and what will need to be done separately. And so we think that there's probably a pretty significant cost implication there that's not yet reflected in this cost. So that's still a little bit unfolding in TBD. Yeah.
Commissioner Buckland, just a quick question. So I see some potential for some cost savings with this new design. So can you talk a little bit about that in energy and pump costs and stuff like that?
Yeah, it is more expensive on the front end. So the capital cost is more, as I noted there. Over time, we did look at that. It's probably about a wash. So it's not like and it may actually be a little bit more in the long, in the long run. It's not a dramatic the energy savings are important, but they're not. It's not like we're cutting the energy by 50% or some crazy dramatic, number. So, other questions? All right. Okay, second project, and this is the last one that I wanted to provide you with a little bit more detailed update on is the Nine Springs Valley capacity improvements, phase 1. And now the sort of new project that we're talking about is the and phase 2, so that's the parentheses there. So, so the Nine Springs Valley Capacity Improvements Phase 1 project was a project that was already in the budget for this year, in the planning phase. So we've been working on a RFP for that. It started as a capacity-driven project. So you can see on the map here where the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor is. So it's essentially upstream of Pump Station 11 there. So you can see Pump Station 11 on the right of the screen. So we're south of the belt line, roughly between, you know, Highway 14-ish and 18151, kind of down in that area of southern part here. So this started as is a capacity-driven project because, you know, this pipe is going to be needing capacity, and we had planned a phased project in several phases to address that. So this is a challenging corridor. It's through the E-Way, the county's E-Way. There's a lot of wetlands. There's a lot of, you know, parkland. There's, you know, recreational areas, that kind of stuff. Wetland being a huge thing because the access is extremely challenging along this corridor. So we know that we need to take a kind of a holistic look at this corridor in order to design phase 1. The questions out there are kind of, is this a complete replacement, upsizing? Is this a relief with adding a parallel sewer and rehabbing the old one? Is there some different route that we, you know, could do, understanding that we already have existing connections onto this pipe? Is a force main on the table? Is it not? So there's a lot to look at holistically before we can, you know, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot with a firm design for phase 1 until we've kind of holistically looked at things. So our plan is to kind of look at things holistically and then also design, get plans and specs done for the most immediate capacity need portion, which is the portion in yellow over to the right. So that's kind of what we already planned on including, and we're already doing. And then came sort of the wild card, I guess, I would say, of what we found when we were working on this emergency repair. So that's kind of the phase 2 part that I'll talk about here for a moment. So we did know we would have to do phase 2. We just didn't think it would need to be quite so quick. So phase 2 is sort of the orange. You can see it way over on the left, just upstream of Pump Station 12. That's roughly where the phase 2 limits are. So we knew capacity was coming up, that would need to be addressed, but it could wait a little while. But after looking at the condition of the pipe during our during our emergency repair, we think we got to kind of move that up a little bit. So there's a couple of pictures on the bottom that Theron took when he was working on that pipe repair. So you can see the joints are not looking good. There's exposed rebar at the joints, and you know that's probably what contributed to the failure that we saw. And how widespread that is, we don't know. You know, we know about the part that we dug up. We assume it's probably not only in this one spot. It's probably, you know, it's probably other areas too. So this is an area that's right next to Goose Lake, you know, so there's consequences of failure are high. So we think it's important to kind of to move this forward a little bit faster than we planned on. So in light of that, you know, we're proposing a separate project. A separate project here makes sense just because that phase 1 stuff that I was talking about with the corridor is really in a different sort of geographic area than this area. You know, the part, the phase 2 part, there's not a lot of options. It's kind of wedged between the bike path and the highway, and there's not a lot of, you know, other places to go. And it's different landowners. There's different things going on there. So pace-wise, it makes sense to, rather than do it as one project, to split this other project off to try to expedite it a little bit. So in doing that, what I think the plan then is shorten up phase 1 a little bit so that it's really, instead of the entire yellow area there, we can shorten it down to the part between Pump Station 11 and the Arrow, just to sort of save a little bit there. And then we think we can shuffle things around and delay some of the rehab projects so that we can move this project ahead in the budget. So,
Question,
yes.
Murphy, just curious, how were the limits of phase two determined? Based on the age of the pipe or?
Great question. I think it was based on basically when capacity, at what time are we because we knew this whole corridor, we can't do it all at once, right? It's a big pipe. So do the part that's, has the greatest capacity need first, and then, this part can wait because we're not going to need capacity there for, 5 more years, and then we can wait and do this part later because we're not going to need capacity there. I think the schedule was more capacity driven. Yeah.
But we're doing it and moving it up in the schedule because of addition.
Correct. Yeah. So we know we're going to run out of capacity relatively soon, and we're worried about the condition now. So that's kind of the combo there.
So, Commissioner Freeze, Lisa, my next question then would be, at where you have that red line for phase two stopping, does the pipe change at that point, or is the same pipe that I see down in the bottom corner, that continue? Right, so I guess what I'm asking is, regardless of capacity, do we have condition issues through this entire corridor?
Great question, and I wish I knew the answer to that. The same type of pipe, so we are actually looking at for phase two, the way it's shown there in orange is really just from pump station 12 to the junction with where the new force main is, but we actually know that the part upstream was installed at the same time. So until where it crosses the 151. So I think we're looking at maybe expanding that a little and doing that entire pipe. But to answer your question, we have this kind of pipe all over the place. Remember that graph with 1970 and what was installed that Ben was talking about? That's this pipe. We have this all over the place. So this may not be the last time that we're talking about a joint failure causing a problem. In fact, right now we know of another one that's currently, we have a meeting to talk about it later today. Actually, there's an issue developing at the Arboretum and Mill Street there, which is also in the same vintage of pipe. So unfortunately, this isn't going to be I think we're going to continue to see these kind of things popping up.
Just a follow-up, and I sympathize. So, so my question is, when I look at this pipe, I can't remember. I'm sure Theron told us, and I just can't recall. Is this like a 36-inch?
I think it's a 42, right? Oops. Sorry, 48? 48, yep.
Okay. So for the pipes I'm used to dealing with, right, a liner is not only a condition repair, right, which is the joints we're looking at here. It is also a structural repair for my size pipes, which usually run 8 inches to 20. Is a lining here on pipes of this size structural for you guys?
It can be, yeah.
Okay.
It can be, but the reason we're not talking about lining this whole thing is because we know that was something we talked about. Hey, should we just try to get this lined like now? Well, we know we're going to have we're having a capacity issue soon. So that would just be basically throwing good money out, really. So that's where we're doing the short liner, where we know we have a known issue. We have a bypass system already set up. We might as well, take care of the known issue. The short liner probably isn't terribly structural, so that's more of a Band-Aid, right? So basically, we're trying to get this thing so that we can sleep at night until we can upsize it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and I'm going to ask one last question, then I promise I'll let you go on. When I see a pipe that I need to line, right, I do it by TV, right? How are you guys able to figure out if this is going to be a problem, right? I'm trying to, in my head, right, I'm trying to decide, because you only have to have so many of these emergency failures before lining the pipe sounds really smart, and doing a secondary pipe next to it. You see, there's going to be there's a break point, right? And so if I think a lot of these joints are bad and we're going to have you know, another sinkhole, another Theron sinkhole every year for the, you know, that was really unfortunate, Bill. So, you see where I'm going with this. How do you figure out, I know how I figure out, but I don't know how you guys figure out.
Well, that's a great question, because one interesting point to note here is that we have TV of this pipe from, I forget how many years ago, not that many years ago, and it looks pretty good, right? The TV looks pretty good. Now, when you dig it up and you see the exterior of the joints looks terrible. So this, if we TV this pipe right now, it actually might look okay, which is also unsettling, right? because what we're seeing with this particular pipe is the corrosion is coming from the outside, right? Rather than, and not necessarily visible on the inside. So, sorry for the bad news, but I think we're gonna, this isn't gonna be a unique situation that we're gonna see in the next years coming up here.
So one other question. I was just curious about the significance of the different colors. I understand the yellow and the orange on the far right and the far left. What the other colors are they related to age? Or?
Yeah, they were related. They were just from that's just from our business case, more or less, that basically laid out, because again, we know we're going to have capacity needed in this whole pipe. And, but some of it, you know, it can wait till say 2040 capacity wise, right? So the way the project was going to unfold was just in phases, and we were breaking it out into the part with the most immediate capacity upgrades sooner, and then breaking it into pieces. Yep.
Be a dumb question, but we do have somewhat paralleling the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor, the Badger Mill Creek return effluent line. Is there any way to be able to make use of that?
Maybe. I mean, that's something we'll look at if we're not using it anymore, corridor-wise. But what we've looked at is, one thing we're seeing is, we've talked about this a little bit, is the situation with easements is going to be challenging through this corridor.
Oh, yeah,
and working with Dane County is going to be challenging on getting easements. And our easements for the force main, I believe, this is some stuff that Vanessa will probably be helping us with, but some of our easements are more, describe in more detail things. You know, some of our easements say we're going to put a pipe in, this section, and that's it. That's all we have for an easement. Some of our easements are very explicit as to what exactly we're having an easement for. And I believe that the effluent force main says what it is for. So then can you put a different pipe that isn't an effluent force main in that same easement? I don't know. So there's some, there's some questions there. So with that, I think that was all I had to say, and I certainly can answer any other questions. And like I said, I breezed through the beginning there pretty quickly. So if you have other follow-up, I'm happy to.
I just like the two comments. First is, I like the idea that on the liquid processing, you were looking at into the future as to what might help with nitrogen. They've been always expecting that to come down the road. And Nine Springs Valley Interceptor is a major interceptor. You know, it serves all of the south side and basically the whole west side of our service territory. It's an area of significant growth. You know, we brought in Verona for doing the Badger Mill Creek, or not the other one you were talking about with the easement issues. And,
yep, Lower Badger Mill Creek.
Yeah,
yep.
Right.
Yep, it's all related to that.
Yeah, it's all, yeah,
yep.
So it's all, I wish I could remember, because I asked the question back in Verona, how long was the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor capacity going to last? Because you're taking area that you weren't expecting in the territory and adding it to the territory. And I don't remember the answer. Must have been far enough out that we didn't have. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Vanessa, regulatory and legal?
Good morning, Vanessa Wishart from Stafford Rosenbaum. We included a regulatory update in the packet for the commission meeting today. I'll just note a couple of items with that update. One is that the DNR has begun moving forward on new drinking water standards for PFOS and PFOA, and a couple other compounds to bring the state drinking water standards into alignment with what has been approved at the federal level, the federal MCLs. And then we also have out for public comment right now a guidance document on PFAS pollutant minimization plans. So if you recall, permittees, after the state adopted rules for PFOS and PFOA in surface waters, permittees are being required to monitor for those compounds, and if monitoring shows a reasonable potential to exceed the state surface water standards, then a permittee would be required to implement a pollutant minimization plan for PFOS and PFOA. So we have guidance from DNR on what those pollutant minimization plans would look like. We're taking a look at that and are working with staff on perhaps filing comments on that guidance document, which are due on the 20th. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions that you have on the regulatory report that was provided or any other regulatory questions.
Anybody?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that will take us to future meeting schedule, where I think 9/26, 10/17, and 10/31, and the November meetings, I think, are all expected to be in person. And then remember, we have a couple other meetings added, like on 11/7, with the subcommittee that you're invited to, and went through those earlier. Okay.
President Hubble, and just as a reminder, the meeting on the 26th is an 8 a.m. start.
Right, because there's no subcommittee, so.
Right.
Yep, thank you.
You know, we're used to 9, but it's
Yep.
back to 8.
Yeah, we'll be back to 8 a.m. on the 26th. The 17th of October, we'll be back to a 9 a.m. for the Standard Commission because the subcommittee beats. Oh, is that the 17th of October? Yeah. Okay. So that takes care of the closed meeting. Do we have a motion to go into closed session to convene, to confer with legal counsel who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy with respect to potential litigation regarding the districts of area-wide water quality plan amendment request for Badger Mill Creek? Motion by Commissioner Freeze, second by Commissioner Clark. So we need a roll call. Janelle or Cassie?
Certainly. Commissioner Bookland?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Eskridge? Oh, looks like she's left. Okay. Commissioner Freeze? Commissioner Hobble?
Aye.
Commissioner Meyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Murphy? Commissioner Rummel?
Aye.
And then just one note, all in-person commissioners will be moving to the maintenance conference room for the closed session. And Commissioner Rummel and Mr. Kent, you'll be prompted to join a breakout room in just one moment. Thank you.
Freeze, second by Commissioner. Yeah, we're convening back into open session. We had a motion by Commissioner Freeze, second by Commissioner Clark, to go back into open session. All commissioners, including Commissioner Rummel, who had to leave between vote and now, were ayes. So that was Commissioner, so you can get a tabulation if it was you, Brad, Greg, Ken, Ezra, Beth, and myself, along with Marcia, 7 of us. And the commission reviewed and discussed the DNR decision relative to Badger Mill Creek. That's all. Okay? Do we have any future agenda topics? Any other business? Adjournment? Motion by Commissioner Freeze, by Commissioner Clark, second by Commissioner Freeze. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.